Well, that is the opener, and this
The
year's
shortest
episode.
opening in all of media, by the way.
Certainly is.
We get right to it.
We're not mucking around, and here we
How
are
you
mucking
doing,
around.
Jason? Great to
Very
be
good to
back with
see you,
you, buddy.
Josh. Thank you. Episode 3987. That's how many days I have been at this 24/7 in one way or another. And I think, Josh, they say the darkest hour is before the dawn. And on the universal clock, the time would be around 1 minute to 5 o'clock in the morning, judging by what's happening out there in the real world. You've got Iran on the ropes. You've got the king effectively submitting to the other king, Donald Trump. Dare we say two kings in America?
No
You've
kings,
also,
right?
that's right. You've got James Comey under arrest. You have got the big news of the day out of the US is the gerrymander with the
Oh,
Supreme Court. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And here in Australia, once again, you have got a whole ton of stuff going on. I'll just give you a quick brief. The Carl Stefanovic show is now taking on NDIS corruption, and it's managed to get Bill Shorten, the Labor former retired minister who was involved with running the NDIS, alongside young Conservative commentator Drew Pavlou to discuss corruption within. And not only that, the idea that mental health patients are being trafficked to get $30,000 worth of payments made to them sent to some dodgy operators. So that's an interesting story just on its own there. We don't have to
sounds like
cover that,
your
but that's just
sounds like your own Somali situation, like we have here in America.
Well, this is the point, right? Because what it means is that there is an industry of being able to screw the government when the
Yeah.
government's not really interested because the government has an ulterior motive. Of course, the other big news is David Morenz, the doctor linked to Eco Health Alliance, Peter Daszak, and of course Anthony Fauci has been
Yep.
indicted on 5 counts, including concealing information in relation to the origins of
All in here.
COVID. You've just put that upside down, Josh. Put
I
that the right
did.
way.
Whoops. There we go.
There it is.
It's all
Preserving
in
liberty.
here.
You,
Yep.
you have written on in your book. I wrote an article yesterday that is quite a substantial article that I put on my Substack. And for those that can't access Substack, what I've done is I've made a PDF copy. And if you message me via PM on Facebook on my Facebook page, I can send you a copy of the PDF. It's about 5 megabytes the file, so it's quite a significant article. But going into great detail about the connections between Morenz, between Peter Daszak, why Peter Daszak was sent over to investigate the origins of COVID, Christian Anderson, and the 3 other scientists who changed their story from saying that
After
it had
Fauci put pressure on them to do so.
that's right. After he said it was looked like it was engineered, only to come out and write an article for the Conversation saying it wasn't, but then facing the House Oversight Committee and saying that he only received money in 2019, despite the fact that he received over $25 million after 2020. Forgot to mention that as well. So it's quite significant. And it shows you where all roads are going. Plus the fact that China, they're all very sensitive about China being offended that it was a political motive to go and investigate the origins of COVID. Now, separately, I wrote another story the other day, completely different. We are going to get into it in the UFO story, but it concerned a particular remote viewer. And this is a skill where people use astral travel to leave their bodies and are able to go and see things outside of their body anywhere on Earth and even off planet. And it's based on, the idea of the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. And so the CIA for many years has studied it and has employed people with this ability. There was one particular lady who had an 89% success rate on predictions and a higher rate of viewing what was going on. But this particular older fellow was talking about a lot of these scenarios, and it's interesting how it all ties in. And what he said was, when he was asked about threats facing humanity in the future, all sorts of ones, and he kept coming back to the number one thing was bioweapons, and that is an example of what the virus out of Wuhan was. What I find more interesting about the story, for those that want to read it and read Josh's book, which, by the way, if you subscribe to Josh, he'll send you a digital copy of that book just for subscribing for around about $40 or $50. No, it's 48, isn't it? Something like that.
It's $49 for the entire year. breaks down to $4.08 a month, which is less than what their minimum requirement is, which is $5 a month. So you can pay $5 a month and go monthly if you want to, but if you do $49, you get a free copy, PDF copy of Preserving Liberty, and everything that you just talked about and what we're talking about, not only in the book, but I actually go through Event 201, which was done in New York City on October 18th, 2019 at 9 a.m. And I talk about who was at the table, who was there, the leaders of the different industries, not just the media, the biggest medical supply companies. A member of the CCP was sitting in that room. It's all in my book. I explain everything. And again, as far as Dr. Morin's is concerned, in my book, I talk about Christian Anderson and Scripps and all of what you just said and the 3,254 documents that were released through a FOIA request. And then the fact that Dr. Morin's basically said, well, I use my personal Gmail because I'm getting so many FOIA requests and I don't want what we're doing to end up, quote, in the New York Times. And again, that's on page 92 in the chapter, which is known as Lab Leak or Wet Market, ? The origins of COVID-19.
Well, Josh, I love this map here. And if you look up the seafood market, supposedly where COVID originated, top left of screen there, and then you take that blue line that does a sort of an upside down U shape, and you can head down to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Mm-hmm. Now, in the world's second most populous country, that 21-kilometer journey will take you 30 minutes. But as the crow flies, it's more like 8 to 10 kilometers. That's all it is as you cross the, I can't see the Yangtze River there, to give you an idea. That's how close it is. Mm-hmm. What I find disturbing about Christian Anderson was that he says, we found something that appears to show it's been engineered, exactly, which is science, and we've verified that with 3 other researchers who he named. It's in the article. And then suddenly he changes his tune to say more favorably, it's more likely that it turned up in the in the market. How do you go from scientific to probability?
Easy.
And consider yourself a scientist unless it's
grant money. That's exactly how.
But he never mentions how close the Wuhan Institute of Virology was to the market. Like, how is that not a proximity, not a thing? Right. And the reality is this: if you consider the film's Contagion, or if you consider the film's 12 Monkey, or consider the film Outbreak, we're talking about a virus that leaks from a lab related to a bat or an animal or something, or a monkey or something like that, and it gets out. So it's not like we're not talking the sum of all fears here with nuclear dust. It's the same process, and that's part of the disturbing sequence of events here, that they very conveniently ignore certain things and very conveniently don't. Now, the other one was the fact check that I go into from the Poynter Institute that tries to dismiss Christian Anderson's claims of it being engineered as just one email. He changed his mind and therefore we rate this claim false. An article came out, it says, a scientific study. Well, he wrote the article and was encouraged by Fauci to do the scientific study. So to talk about conflict of interest on top of conflict of interest.
And then Fauci reached out to him and said, you better change that or I'm cutting your grant money. That's what happened. And then, of course, Christian Anderson said, oh, okay, well, then I'll have to change it. And that's exactly what he did. And it wasn't just him. There was a whole bunch of people, medical establishment, that went on board with basically medical misinformation. I mean, you could consider it a medical deep state. Yep. I covered all of that back in 2020 and 2021 on my own show with all my folks. They remember all the different exposés that we did at the time. But here's another thing. A pangolin is kind of a rare animal in China. I mean, yes, they're prevalent in certain areas, especially in the Zhejiang province and in some of the mountainous areas and things like that. But they're not like walking around all over the place. You know what I mean? So they're more of a rare type of animal. And so for it to have somehow come from one pangolin in some wet market that was sold and was selling this meat, it's the odds are kind of astronomical. Okay, they're like Halley's Comet type of odds here. Okay, So again, we know this thing came from the lab, and like you pointed out, how close in proximity the lab actually was.
The idea that these so-called gain-of-function experts, interestingly, in the article, I don't say the words gain-of-function at all. It's not even necessary. It's almost superfluous to what's going on when you read so much manipulation and the process. And then, of course, you've got the Five Eyes agencies that The Guardian reported about, saying that there was no way that it was a lab leak or came from a lab. Well, we know what spies do. They lie. And so it's interesting
51 of them lied about Hunter's laptop, right?
Absolutely, and we'll actually see that in the article as well. So it's interesting how, even though we were covering that historically in real time, and then to go back and review it, it meant that even though it took me 6 hours to write that article yesterday, and it was because I kept accumulating more information, going back, verifying, double checking, etc. I was writing it out of my head from memory, which was so interesting. And it was just that Morenz just put a different spin as he was the first one. But I want to say this for those people that are saying, "Oh well, nothing's going to happen." This whole nothing burger stuff. Something's happening. Todd Blanche is moving at a rate of knots now, and you don't indict somebody in the COVID cover-up on the same day as you hear that James Comey has a warrant out for his arrest, and now he is officially under arrest, at the same time that you have the King from the city of London coming to meet the president, at the same time that Iran is begging for the for the Karg Island to be opened up, and the Strait now they want to do something because they're broke, they're bursting, and no one's in charge. So the shadow diplomacy scenario is worked out a treat, and Trump has rejected their offer, their deal. It's a no nuclear deal, and it's very, very clear now that we are at the sum of all fear stage. They don't want that nuclear dust being identifying that is American uranium, Josh. That would be the ultimate collapse if that were the case, because then it implicates all of the people that are holier than thou or pretended that they were. Now that all ties in to this other big thing, which effectively is the story of the day. I'm going to put up Carmine Sabia's post. Here it is. Answer me this question. He says, those of you who are concerned about today's decision by the Supreme Court about the Voting Rights Act, why do you believe one race deserves extra voting power? That sounds very racist. This was never about fairness. It was always about Democrat cheating. Josh, take it from there.
Absolutely. This is an absolutely huge decision. This is a decision that you and I have been discussing for months now, since this Calais versus Louisiana case actually hit the court. And again, it was all about racial gerrymandering. And in Section 2, it basically was being bastardized because the 14th Amendment already forbids that type of thing to happen, right? You're not allowed to do that. So by using Section 2 to make new maps to favor minorities, all it did was just dilute the power of the states and basically, I guess unconstitutionally, certainly in this case, gerrymandered them so that they would have more representation when they actually didn't deserve it. Okay. Now, here's the thing. This is coming from Axios, which is pretty much a left-leaning, left-wing publication. They predict a minimum of 19 new seats for Republicans. Now, here's what I'm going to work on from right now. This is my solemn promise and swear to do. I will focus all my attention, of course, getting the SAVE Act, but making sure that state legislatures start doing redistricting immediately before these midterms. There are 21 states that have majorities and or super majorities. Indiana has a super majority. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida's already doing redistricting, at least 4 seats. Georgia, Idaho, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, they're going to probably redo their map now because of this decision and add that extra seat back, so that's good. Missouri has already started, and they did, I think, 3 or 4 more seats. Montana, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, South Carolina, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Now, not every single one of those states has a supermajority, but it has a majority. So what does that mean? That means that we've got to get motivated to get these state legislatures to start redistricting immediately. If you can get three, let's just say three, out of all of these states to get three new seats, you're talking 34 to 37 more seats. I mean, you want to talk about keeping a majority. I would say this decision in and of itself, it didn't repeal Section 2, but it basically gutted it and neutered it to the point where you can't gerrymander anymore. And so what I think here is, first and foremost, the South is gone. Democrats won't win the South anymore. I mean, that's just, it's gone. Because the South, which is the most conservative parts of the country in America, they're going to redistrict. And if they don't, we're going to push them to do it. So here we have this wonderful, amazing decision. Now we got to motivate these people to get off their ass and start redoing these redistricting. Some states are doing it. Tate Reeves, Mississippi, he's already announced before the decision came out, and I was going to cover this the other day, and there was, of course, the shooting at the White House, so there was breaking news. I covered that instead. But he said that he already has a special session set up 20 days after the decision. So he was being very, very assumptive, as if he knew something that we all didn't know. Well, apparently he knew, and that's why he came out and said that. That's also why Ron DeSantis called a special session, and it passed the House. It's going to the Senate next. So again, even Texas should actually look at their map, and instead of just 5, I would add another 2 more, based on the fact that there's no more gerrymandering. So we're going to attack the South first and foremost. We're going to get all those states. If we can get even half of those states to do it, I mean, you're talking, 25, 26 more votes for, electoral votes as far as House members, districts, if you will. So we've got to get working, and we've got to get working quickly. And of course, the SAVE Act, that's another thing we've got to continue to fight for as well. I am literally hearing right now that John Thune has been meeting secretly in the middle of the night with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Now, without Republicans. Now, why is he doing that? What would be the purpose of that other than to undermine President Trump and President Trump's agenda? Or who knows? Some people even suggested that they're working on ways so that Democrats can try to win the House, and he's going to help them impeach the president. John Thune is a backstabbing scumbag, and he needs to be removed. I hope that the MAGA patriots continue to put forward a lot of force, and maybe we can get them to call for new leadership, because that's what needs to happen here.
Why would you side with the end of the Democrats when they're literally losing their voting power, and think that you're going to run out the clock for some sleazy character such as Chuck Schumer, of all things, and Timu Obama, the most inept nothing burger of a leader within the Democrat Party?
The only thing I can say to that is they all hate Trump, and even in the minority, they would rather be in the minority than the majority and have to pass President Trump's agenda. I mean, I don't understand it either. It doesn't make any sense. Mitch McConnell's, little boy toy is basically John Thune, and has been for the longest time. So maybe we can get a new majority leader, Rick Scott, Ted Cruz, somebody else, anyone else, really, that will actually take the mantle, take the policies, take the MAGA, America First agenda, and put it moving forward, get it into law, get these executive orders that the president was so rightfully to sign, 300 plus of them in the opening salvo, if you will, of this administration, and get them put into law, codify them into law, so that they can't have in the future be undone and taken down. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the Supreme Court just gave us a huge step up.
It doesn't make any sense that 85% of the American public wants, proper voting rules such as voter ID, but then you would be in a party that's pushing it and then vote against it. Like, who are you to do that? You're not representing the people. You're representing a power struggle of the most corrupt of the corrupt, the McConnells, the Schumers, as I said, and you're trying to protect that. Like, it's clearly a zero-sum game here. They can't possibly win except to prove and preserve the corruption within the system of an establishment that's already dead and is on life support. It doesn't make any sense to me. So, John Thune, well, whatever's coming for you, mate, you're obviously in trouble. And at this point, you're
President
sweating
Trump
bullets.
comes for him, that's what we need to do. We need to get President Trump to come out on Truth Social and say, I've had enough. I want him replaced. Because if President Trump calls for replacing him, trust me, the vote's going to happen immediately. And that's what needs to happen here. But I don't have the power to do that. I can reach out to the right people. I can continue to suggest it. I can continue to push it, put it on social media, whatever I can do. But in the meantime, I'm going to make a concerted effort to reach out to a lot of the state legislatures in these states that have majorities and supermajorities, because if we can't get the SAVE Act done yet, at least we're going to try to get redistricting done so we can get more and more and more seats.
Yep. No, very good. Now, I want to cover a bit of Australian news for people. Most people aren't really going to be too fussed about what's coming in terms of the May budget. But the talk has been for some time, and although that they won't give away too much in terms of what the percentage changes will be, but there will be changes to the capital gains tax discount, which is currently 50%. And I'll explain that in a second, and also to negative gearing. But of course, the Murdoch press has come out and rounded up an expert that says that rents will rise, but won't be supercharged as they were when Bob Hawke tried to do it some 40 years ago. And of course, economics is the study of putting two economists in a room, getting three opinions, and for them all to be wrong. So
Exactly,
we take that.
It's a good one.
we take that with a grain of salt. Well, I'm going to I'll attribute that quote to my friend Daniel Ransom. At the age of 16 in year 11 economics, I sat next to him because he was the smartest guy in the class, and he used to write all these things in his margin on his paper, and he used to copy them down. And when I went to study much later on, it was everything he wrote in the margin that was the gold dust compared to what the teacher said. But he gave me that quote.
I like it. It's good.
And he said, and the first thing he said to me when I asked him about it, he said, look, economics is the study of making common sense complicated. Yeah. And there it was. And I knew I was sitting next to the right guy. That's probably where my interest came in politics and in economics, because it was interesting. Instead of talking about abstract concepts, you're talking about how people make money and how things happen and how a country become wealthy, a country can become poor, etc. So there it was. So we have this weird law that came out under John Howard's stewardship as Prime Minister many years ago now, where you got a discount on the capital gain made on a property. So let's say you bought a property for, back in the day, $300,000, and you sell it for $600,000. The idea being that you have a capital gain of $300,000 and you put that on your income tax for the year. So it lifts your income. Let's say you're earning $100,000, your income is now $400,000. So the tax that you would pay on the $300,000 would be at your marginal rate of tax, which is clearly the top rate of tax, which would be at least 45 cents in the dollar. So you'd get a tax bill on the $300,000 of something like $140,000. So Howard said, what we're going to do is we're going to discount that by half, which is 50%. So therefore, you would only have to declare $150,000 of the gain on your income, and therefore pay about $70,000 tax. That's the difference on the $300,000, and it is still a lot. But here's the thing that was the reason why they did it. It's called inflation. Just because your property went up from 300 to 600 over a period of 10 or 20 years doesn't mean $600,000 is worth what it was 20 years ago, and that's the point. So now they're trying to manipulate it, and there's different stories whether they'll reduce the discount to 30%, 25%, etc. But what they're doing is sneakily going to, if they go with this method, is to eat into the CPI, like the inflation value of your dollar. So your money's going backwards. Plus the fact that you've been negative gearing the property anyway, which means that the rent that you collect doesn't even cover the interest that you have to pay on said loan. So you're topping it up in the meantime. Now, the other option is that what they do is that they apply a simple CPI calculation to the cost based price of the home. So, in other words, if you bought the home for $300,000 and then you added an average inflation over a period of 20 years of, let's say, 4%, then that $300,000 increases the cost base to say 420. You then pay tax on the 600 less the 420, and therefore that's a little bit different. But the point is that if you're going to do it, you've got to do it properly. You can't just arbitrarily change it so that you're taking an advantage for yourself. So what will happen is it will be grandfathered, meaning that those currently owning the properties may not have to pay the penalty, but they'll manipulate where they can manipulate because it's all about them. And it's, of course, because they've got a massive shortfall, and the only thing they can do after this is to charge exit taxes for people leaving the country, or death taxes for people leaving life. That's kind of where they're at now. And interestingly, Alexander Muse on X wrote a big story today about California and their proposed billionaire tax that he said it's a slippery slope on a sliding scale, because what you introduce today will obviously increase over time and the net will grow, the inflation, etc. And he gave many examples from France and from Spain and from other countries throughout recent history and modern all history, and then explained that actually it's a tax on innovation, more or less, because what you're doing is you're just going to get future billionaires moving to places like Texas where they don't have to pay this, or more so, a young entrepreneur, he says, who comes up with a great idea and says, doesn't think that I'm going to build this business and sell it when I get 5 million. He believes he's going to turn it into the next $500 billion company. So in other words, he goes to Florida or to Texas or to somewhere else and sets up. So ultimately, it's a tax on innovation. Is the terminology that I would use to explain his article. But this is the point with Labor governments: is it's all about their big spending. They are more interested in letting the entrepreneurs go about their business, and they just come in over the top like standover men and take their cut, their tribute, so that they can distribute it. And that then leads me now to another quick story I want to mention again, is the Carl Stefano, the interview of Drew Pavlo alongside Bill Shorten, talking about the corruption within. So it's all fine and dandy to take all this money off the so-called billionaires who've made their money through business, through their own innovations, etc. But then when you give it to the government and then they set up, fraud schemes within it, is just another level where you just think you can't possibly think that this is a reality that we can live with. And it's highly it's entirely a broken system at this point, and it demands big changes. Also in my Australian news, Josh, just a quick one. This is from the RSL Australia. So this is your Return Service League for veterans. They've announced today that, in fact, on the 23rd, so it's a bit older, that Gina Reinhardt, through Hancock Prospecting, will contribute $200 million to purchase properties to house Australia's homeless veterans. There's as many as 6,000 homeless veterans that need a roof over their heads. So that's an example of a billionaire donating money through private charity, and $200 million to Gina Reinhardt is, it might only be $2,000 to the rest of us. But I don't have $2,000 to give to the veterans right now, unfortunately, and Gina does have the 200 million. So that's a big deal, and it just reminds me of what we're achieving behind the scenes on a microscopic political scale. At a personal level, Josh, that we're all trying to make a contribute, which is leading up to the reason and the Merge or Die book coming soon.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, look, I think it's wonderful that someone with a lot of wealth is giving back and helping the veterans, homeless veterans and all that. Getting back to what you were talking about with the death tax, that's something that we eliminated with I think it was the One Big Beautiful Bill. We might have even actually eliminated that years ago in another bill in President Trump's first term. But I think the Democrats tried to bring it back. But of course, lowering capital gains taxes, I mean, honestly, there shouldn't be any capital gains taxes as far as I'm concerned. Why should you get penalized for that? I mean, look, most properties, go up anywhere between, let's say, 6 to 8% appreciation per year, right? In any normal economic times. Sometimes in great times that you'll get 12, 18, 24, 30% value. In bad times, it'll drop down to 2.5%, 3.5%, 4% value, right? But on average, it's about 6 to 8%. That's why investing, in real estate is a good thing, because your best friend is time. The longer you have it, the more money you're going to make on it, clearly. And that goes with anything: office buildings, complexes, commercial real estate, regular real estate, residential real estate, homes, whatever. And so as it's going up, you're making more money, which is good because if you sell the property, you're going to pay off your mortgage, you're going to get a nice chunk of money, you can go out and buy something else, get a bigger home. That's the American dream. And there's no reason that people should be penalized for having the wherewithal and the smarts to purchase real property, sit on it, watch it go up, and then what? You sell it, you make money, and then the government wants some of that money? No. Middle finger to you guys. It should not be like that. So I know that we've lowered the capital gains tax. At one point, it was Denmark, I think, and the United States were the number one and number two highest in capital gains taxes under the auto pen years, if you will. So this is something that liberals and Labor Party people and government, lovers and globalists love to do. They want to raise taxes all the time to squeeze the people, take as much money that they can legally get away with, and leave you with practically nothing. And that's why conservative leadership is just the opposite. We want you to have it all. We want you to have low capital gains tax. We want you to invest in property, invest in your family, invest in your community, and not be penalized for it. I mean, it's such a 180, as far as from the left's perspective and ideology to what, growth, laissez-faire, capitalism, conservatism, all means. And it's a prime example of what's happening in Australia right now.
When you think about housing, right, it comes down very simply to affordability and availability, supply and demand, or scarcity.
Supply and demand, sure.
Now, that's why people get their nose out of joint about immigration when you keep pouring petrol onto the fire of supply and demand. Where are you going to put all these people? And so that's part of the reason why the property prices increase, because of, supply and demand scarcity. Now, if you move into an economy of abundance and effectively you don't need the money, and Elon Musk would argue for a high universal basic income in the future, that's a completely different kettle of fish. And it almost becomes this whole utopia, socialism, Brave New World scenario. So we have really interesting competing ideas out there. But at the end of the day, it's about contributionism, to quote the brilliant Michael Tellinger from South Africa. And interesting, I bring his name up, that just popped into my head because he introduced this whole idea of said contributionism, which is a completely different economic concept altogether. And the idea was that you take any sort of small town, country town, so whatever, 5,000 residents, 10,000 residents. And the idea is that each person in that town contributes 3 hours to something that they specialize in that particular area. It might be the growing of a certain type of fruit or vegetable. It might be the manufacture of a certain type of good or service. But the ability to contribute some time and be the best at it in the world makes that particular product, good or service that you're creating not only the best of the best, but also the cheapest of the cheap, because you're not having a labor content to it. So what happens is you then compete on the open market, you become the dominant force in that particular type of good or service, and then you start reaping the rewards because you're still earning very good profits, and that money goes back to this particular town. And that's how he defines contributionism. Now, it's working in a few little places around the world, but again, it's a very, very big concept, and etc. So it's more academic at this stage than anything else. But when you consider the idea of making your contribution simply why we all go to work in the first place is about productivity. And it's not just about paper shuffling or financial engineering. And Jared Rennick talks a lot about that as somebody who, he says he is a financial engineer, being an accountant. He says we need less of us and we need more of real engineers to build things. And it's not necessarily just to build homes to house people. That's great. And he has a very specific set of policies in the party, such as increasing the tax-free threshold to put more money in your pockets, more ways to access your own money to get a deposit to get into your home. And he insists that the best thing that you can do is buy your home as early as possible, have a roof over your head, and pay it off. Perhaps by the time you're 40 or 50 years of age, and then you have the whole world ahead of you. That's the very basics of it, and that's what we all want. So that's the difference why we're talking about a political process now. Now, it's one thing to want to be a revolutionary, like we saw the people in Canberra this week, Josh. There was about 20 people that went to this rally that used to have hundreds of thousands of people going. And so what's happening is that this is the revolutionary section of this so-called freedom community that just want to collapse the system and blame everything, and they want, justice for everyone, etc. But there's no means, there's no resources, there's no organization, and there's no tactics behind it. And there is a process to all this stuff, and unfortunately moving the needle politically takes time, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of disappointment, and you have to take your wins and your losses. They're called gains for a reason. They don't just happen because you want it. Right. Or justice doesn't just happen because on your clock. You can't expect that things are going to happen just because it was. And I think what happened is, and I think all of us are guilty of it, especially when we feel negative about certain things happening, we get a feeling of entitlement. Oh, this should happen because I know that it's corrupt. Well, unless you're contributing to bringing that to the fore by becoming a journalist, by joining a political party, by getting a job in a new area and influencing people at the water cooler conversations, you can't just change it through wishing for it to happen. It doesn't work like that. We're not telepathic yet, even though that may be coming in the future. But that's the point. And I know it's painful, but it's not. We've had massive wins this week. This is probably our best week in years. COVID conspiracy indictment, James Comey indictment, the Supreme Court gerrymander, and my favorite subject of them all, the UFO subject, Josh. And when you're ready, I'm going to cut to that.
Well, let me touch on a couple of things. A lot of people ask, well, why would the government want to bring in people knowing that there's a scarcity of homes, affordability issues? Why would they want to keep bringing more and more and more people in to push out the native people, right? The people that are working, the people that live there, and everything else. And it really comes down to money. They realized a long time ago that we can make money on homelessness. We can make money on poverty. We can make money on these NGOs. We can make money on these fake Christian organizations that pretend to care about the downtrodden and all this other stuff. And so all of these have become a business. And there's millions, if not billions of dollars that is going to these things. So the government is getting fatter and richer by bringing these people in. Let's not forget the other benefit, a byproduct, if you will, which is the fact that they now bring these people in and they get them registered to vote so that they can stay in power, so they can get more people, more poverty, more homeless, and more money. And I think people need to be able to somehow break that down and explain it. And I'll tell you right now, the guy that's running for the Los Angeles mayor, Spencer Pratt, apparently he was like a reality TV star. He is crushing it on social media right now. He has one video that shows Karen Bass in her huge mansion, and then the socialist right next to it, where her huge mansion is. And then he goes, here's my house. And he's in a little tiny trailer on what used to be his beautiful mansion that was burned down because of their incompetency and or intentional, doing so with the whole thing with the fires in California. There's even now an audio recording, believe it or not, that was just leaked, that right before she was taking her trip to Ghana, one person was on the other line saying, hey, this fire could get really dangerous really quick. And she's like, I don't care. I have to go. Biden allowed me to go, to Ghana for this trip, so I'm taking this trip. And then, of course, while she's gone, the fires explode and erupt, right? So the incompetence and evilness of left-leaning, leaders, if you will, which are not real leaders, is what has caused the demise, not just of Los Angeles, but in so many areas of Australia, so many areas in the UK, so many areas in New Zealand, so many areas all over the place. Anytime you have liberals and Democrats and Labor Party leaders, you're going to have a worse quality of life, number one, You're going to have more immigration. Number two. Number three, you're going to have more people, voting in your elections that are not legally allowed to do so. I mean, they destroy everything. So I wanted to point that out because I really hope the people in Los Angeles have had enough and they actually vote for this guy, Spencer Pratt.
Well, one can only hope, but I tell you what, indoctrination certainly runs deep, and as do habits. And but at the same time, with the right leadership and the right inspiration, things can turn around. It's just a matter of time. I mean, in many ways, you look at Australia, and it's taken Pauline Hanson 30 years to become an overnight success. All of a sudden, the party goes from 4% to 25%. At that stage, there are those that want to white out the party and say, "Oh, I'm smarter than you. Pauline's not going to work." Well, Pauline's half the answer, but the point is, it's a direction. It's momentum, and it's a juggernaut, and it's how you then apply layer within and upon that juggernaut to then get to the stage, and it's all about the merging of the parties. Now, I want to just quickly bring up a story that's just popped up from Clandestine in relation to what's happening US militarily. And he says Trump begins the consolidation of the US military in the Western Hemisphere. And Trump posts, the US is studying and reviewing the possible reduction of troops in Germany with a determination to be made over the next short period of time. And it's happening, says Clandestine. Trump just spoke to Putin and said things were positive, and now Trump announces they're looking at reducing the standing army in Germany. So as Clandestine says, as he hypothesized, Trump is reducing our military footprint in the Eastern Hemisphere, which will lead to normalized relations with Russia and China and the end to the war in Ukraine. Imagine that. And he then goes on to add, just here, US military presence in Germany is essentially the standing deterrent for all of Europe and is Putin's biggest threat. If NATO and Ukraine were to draw the US into direct conflict with the US military, which he doesn't want. Long story short, Trump looking to remove our standing military presence from Germany signals the end of the US involvement in NATO and thus the end of the war in Ukraine and potentially the end of the Cold War with Russia that never really ended. Trump is beginning the process of consolidating our forces into the Western Hemisphere and resettling the global order, an extremely good sign. And remember, all of this benchmark is in relation to the FIFA World Cup starting in June. So all of this is going to happen very, very quickly. I mean, May is certainly probably the most exciting month I think we're ever going to see for all of the things that are happening, because then when you go into July 4th celebrations, for goodness sake, the 250th anniversary, this is going to be the moment that I've asked people in the past, when was the last great thing that brought everyone together in Australia? And we went back to the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. For you guys, it's probably 2026 when you consider the 250th anniversary, the FIFA World Cup, and then in 2028, the Olympic Games. This is a golden age before your very eyes. And the first thing you've got to do is be able to clean it up so that it can happen in a way that you can actually enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that the first salvo of the 250 celebration was obviously the men's hockey team, the women's hockey team. That really kind of jump started things. But you're right. We're moving into the event that's going to be the MMA fighting at the White House in front, on the lawn. You've got the FIFA, you've got the Summer Olympics. So yes, I think there's going to be a lot of patriotism and pro-America, feelings out there in the American people. And again, that's perfect because it's right before the midterm election. So we still have plenty of time to kind of turn this thing around. But again, like I said, we need to get this redistricting done. We got to get the Save America Act passed and put into law. So we still have a lot more work to do. But, Clandestine could be right on some things and wrong on others. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that many of the so-called NATO allies weren't allies when we needed them. And again, many of them said, well, once you defeat Iran, then we'll help you out. It's like, what? We don't need you then, right? So I think President Trump is being serious about punishing NATO and punishing the countries in NATO that refuse to help out with the Iran situation and the blockade. And rightfully so. I'm glad that he's doing this. And I think that we ought to look at different alliances in the future, because this is not the same NATO that was there for World War II. They're just not. They're not the same NATO. They have their own agenda, and that agenda is not to help and support the financial backing, if you will, of all of NATO. So I said it before, I'll say it again right now. I want President Trump to at least threaten, if not pull out of NATO completely, and say, hey, this is it. We're done. You're on your own. Defend yourselves. Oh, wait, you can't defend yourselves? No, you can't, because they shot a missile into Europe, right, at the military base, less than a month ago. So apparently you can't even defend yourselves, and you're sitting here trying to dictate to the United States what we should do in this war. What are you, crazy? So I like this. Greenland is basically ours anyway at this point. We don't need to take it. We have the agreement. We're enacting the agreement. We're building 3 more military bases in Greenland right now as we speak, and we're building the Golden Dome. So the Arctic is going to be protected, of course. And with everything else that's going on, NATO has shown their true colors, number one, and number two, President Trump ought to punish them, and punish them severely.
Well, there you go. So we're all in agreement, it seems, that US exiting of NATO is going to make a big difference, and therefore, as would be argued by Susan Kakinda and Barbara Boyd on Promethean Action, that this is effectively the NATO is using the US to fight Russia on their behalf, and the normalisation as clandestine covers is the process there. Now, Josh, my favourite subject, and the reason that I love it is because I feel like it's the missing link, not just in the origin of the species, but in the destiny of humanity as we move forward and evolve, whatever that is, into the great wide universe that's there. And to briefly cover again this particular Sergeant Lynn Buchanan, the older remote viewer, he explained that in his viewing, he said there are many ET species that exist, and he says, and look, it's worth just me giving a little bit of background. He explained the idea of a UFO coming down, as people have seen, and beaming down to somebody below and pulling them up through a laser beam or something to study them. He says that shows you that they have to come to Earth from the other side of the galaxy or wherever they're coming from, or the solar system, whatever, to come here to extract a human being for the purpose of study. When you're a remote viewer, you can literally communicate with or visit somebody on the other side of the universe. That level of psychic ability proves that we are far beyond the ones that have to come here to see us. And you can literally open up, information trading, if you will, with that ability. And he says there are 4 different subsets or quadrants to consider. Those that are more psychic than us, those that are less psychic, those that are malevolent, and those that are benevolent. And he says, when you divide that up, those that are less psychic than us simply want to trade with us. That's what it's about. And imagine being able to trade between planets and species is massive, just for what it would bring to us all. There are those that are malevolent and more psychic, and they want to destroy us. And then there are those that are benevolent and psychic, more psychic than us, and they want us to join the community. And what Buchanan says is that what we don't realize is that when we eventually enter this particular galactic community, whether it be next year or the next 1,000 years or whatever it is, we will rise up the ladder due to our innate psychic abilities and become one of the dominating species out there in the universe. That's our potential. So ultimately a good thing. And I think that's the thing, not to be afraid of anything. And I cover all this in my article that you can check out on my Substack via channel51.com.au. And it also ties into the other article about the video I did last week about the world domination and who are all the players. Because what we're seeing right now is that what Trump's doing through this normalizing relations with China and Russia is he's taking the threat of China trying to seek world domination and living in harmony. So whilst he's knocked out the globalists, which is quite clear, who is another group trying to take us all over that we've all been afraid of, he's also normalizing relations with China. At the same time, he's subduing Islam through Iran. And at the same time, the whole Greater Israel thing that everyone's got their knickers in a twist over is an absolute bunch of nonsense. If you think that somehow 15 million people are going to take over 2 billion Muslims and 8 billion around the world. And the thing is, try and become Jewish. You can't. It's almost impossible to convert to Judaism. You walk into a synagogue and ask a rabbi, can I convert? He says, mate, go away. We don't want you. And not because whatever. It's not how it works. It's a completely different scenario. And then people get their knickers further. They call us goyim is the other thing that people say. Well, what about when Islam calls you an infidel?
Yeah.
what's the difference? I mean,
Not
it's this
much.
type of, exactly, it's this type of, waiting, etc. So I put that to bed and say this is the process of what's going on here, and we can argue. People will argue that Israel controls Trump. Well, we know that that's an absolute nonsense. Like I think we can forget about that now. But just getting into this whole subject about control and anger and all the rest of it. Before I get into the UFO subject, I'm going to play you a clip from Dinesh D'Souza, unrelated. This is him talking and trying to explain Candace Owens' behavior. And I think it's an important part because, as Q said, who do you follow type of thing. Anyway, worth a look. Take a look.
I believe Candace came to the conclusion that Charlie was hers by destiny, by divine right. And the fact that Charlie and Erica ended up together was more than she could bear. Candace has always been somewhat unhinged, but now she went completely berserk. She was inconsolable in her rage. She developed a vendetta. Envy is a very powerful force in human nature. I'm reminded of Othello, Shakespeare's great saga about the fruits of envy. In Othello, the envious man is Iago, and in the play, he expresses the nature of envy powerfully, but not in a line about Othello, but rather about another attractive figure, Cassio. Iago says of Cassio, "He hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly." Now, Candace, like Iago, knows that there is a public mythology about Charlie and Erica that developed after Charlie's assassination. It's not that different from what happened to JFK. From Candace's point of view, nothing could be more obvious than Erica wanting Charlie. Why wouldn't she want to marry the prince? The real mystery is why Charlie wanted Erica and chose Erica over Candace. Why did Charlie make Erica Charlie's angel? I think I know the answer to that.
I think that's
That's an interesting take. I've interviewed Dinesh. He's a smart guy. I've seen all of his movies. I don't know. That's an interesting take. I didn't. Is he trying to say that she wanted to date Charlie? I'm trying to figure that part out.
Oh, 100%. She's
because
clearly in love with Charlie.
Okay, so could have been some of that, but they never had any type of relationship, right?
No.
Prior. So it's more like a weird kind of, secret crush, if you will, is basically what he's saying here. And that's driven her to this type of insane, barbaric behavior. Maybe. I mean, and I guess anything's possible. I think she's just a Jew-hating scumbag, if you want to know the truth. But I think a lot of them are. I think a lot of them have just, for whatever reason, they want to blame everything on Israel. They want to blame everything that they can. Tucker does the same thing. So many others do the same thing. And it's just a scapegoat. It's just a scapegoating type of thing because they can't understand, and I've said this before, they can't understand the brilliance of what President Trump is doing in Iran. And I think the left in particular is also upset because they know what he's doing. They just won't admit it. So that's why they're saying he doesn't have a plan. That's why they're saying, he attacked a sovereign nation that was not a threat. I mean, they know it was a threat. They've been saying it was a threat for all these years. They just didn't have the balls to do anything about it. And so now they don't want Trump to get another victory. That's what this is all about. And I don't know why Candace has become the animal that she has become, other than the fact that she's secretly an anti-Semite. And I say this all the time. Scratch a conservative long enough, eventually you'll find the anti-Semite.
It's
not all, but a lot of them.
It is an interesting phenomenon, and this idea of that all the world's woes can be single-handedly pointed at one type of person, and then the conclusions that they draw and the sides that they choose, and then it creates a bandwagon. And then if someone supports your bias, well, then you have what is a movement, and right. That's the point of it.
Or what you think is a movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Their voices are not that loud.
It's quite feral. I'll get into the subject now because I'm going to play the clip here. This is the beginning of what we're going to talk about.
Mr. President, I have two questions for you. First, on the topic of space, do you have an update on the UFO files and when we're going to be seeing those?
Well, I think we're going to be releasing as much as we can in the near future. For some reason, and I guess it's just a reason that's been in the minds of people for a long time, that is such, they want to find out about the UFOs. and anything having to do with UFO or related material. And we're going to be releasing a lot of things from that we have. And I think some of it's going to be very interesting to people. I've interviewed people, my first term primarily, but I interviewed some pilots, very solid people, and they said they saw things that you wouldn't believe. So you're going to be reading about it.
So it's quite powerful because it's a release of information that clearly they have something. It's more than nothing. Trump gave a lot of it away back when Joe Rogan interviewed him before he was re-elected.
Yeah, I remember that.
What did they tell you? They told me a lot. Well, they can't tell you a lot about nothing. Well, here
He
is
tried to press him and he wouldn't say it.
And then, of course, Obama then lets loose and cuts his little bit out, which was also interesting. Well, here's Anna Paulina Luna talking to Miranda Devine.
I have seen evidence in a skiff that leads me to believe there are things we cannot explain, and I have observed things that are of non-human origin and creation. That's my opinion. Again, but there has been a declassification order from the president, and you will see as soon as that stuff comes out.
You know, if you had to just make a decision now about whether there really were, I guess, aliens moving among us with their strange machines that have all sorts of powers, do you think that's plausible?
I don't call them aliens, and I don't know what these things are that they're using, right? But I think that there's stuff that we have witnessed as members of Congress, been briefed on that we cannot explain. And I will leave it at that because that's going to be coming out soon. And I think that the American people will have many of their questions answered.
So you've seen in a skiff evidence.
I can't tell you what I've seen in a skiff because I'll get in trouble for that.
Right.
But when it's declassified, well, I have to be careful about how I answer it. But when it's declassified, I will have a press conference and I'll show you exactly what we saw.
So
Very interesting stuff, you know, and I'm sure we're going to do a full hour on UFOs, right? You can't wait for that one.
Well, absolutely. Well, I recently made contact again with my friend Brad Olson, who's an author in this space in the US. I lost contact with him when my Facebook was taken out a year and a half ago, and I thought I'd better reach out and just send my condolences for his friend David Wilcock, who passed away. And what was lovely was that Brad responded to me within minutes, and he sort of was looking forward to speaking to me, and of course we got caught up, and he said, look, I'm going to go to a particular conference in New York, but when I get back in early May, let's regroup and we'll do a show together. So that's kind of cool. He was an author that I discovered some years ago, and I bought these particular sets of books that were just incredible. They document with notations virtually every conspiracy in history. It's quite incredible the amount of work that he's done. So it'd be interesting to catch up with Brad. He's a real knockabout type of guy, very, very tall, about 6'7", very popular. And that'll be probably my re-entry into doing my interviews on my own. I apologize to those people that have reached out to me for interviews, and I haven't been able to put them together in a way that's going to give you the audience that you deserve, given the small size of my audience here. But on the space of the ET stuff, which is kind of my favorite subject, that's going to be a little bit different, and that's purely for my own perspective. And if anyone watches, they don't. It doesn't really matter. But for the other things on health issues, etc., until I've got you somebody that I can build that back up with, I just haven't been able to put that together. So apologies for that. Here's where I want to go on the UFOs, Josh. This particular fellow, chilling claim, former US Marine Michael Herrera says he encountered a massive UFO, covert personnel and alleged cover-up, and that dates back to 2009 during a mission in Indonesia. These are things that are now popping up every day. Tim Burchett was interviewed the other day on Piers Morgan's show, and he says that aliens exist and classified briefings prove they have visited Earth. And he got into a fair bit of detail on Piers Morgan, who tested and challenged him. Then there's Dave Grush. I think it's an AI version of him there, but UFO whistleblower Dave Grush says disclosure will be uncomfortable and very Star Trek, but real. He also admitted on the Rogan show that whilst he doesn't necessarily believe it now, he would not be surprised if the human species was actually seeded by extraterrestrials, which relates to the Anunnaki story. So there's another interesting one. And of course, all of this, Josh, as we get into the final leg of the show, as we're going to wrap things up, Steven Spielberg is releasing his movie Disclosure in early June, and apparently dropped UFO footage so disturbingly real that experts can't tell if it's a movie magic or actual evidence.
Wow.
And his movie is called Disclosure Day. And if there's ever one film director to herald the release, it says to me that Spielberg's movie is going to come out, and then the US government a week or two later, or whatever, whenever it's $1 billion, everyone's watching it, and then they go, well, here's the reality. And if it matches what Steven Spielberg says, he either looks like an oracle or had access to classified intel, which goes all the way back to Close Encounters, which people in the industry said that was the closest depiction of reality. That's an interesting one. But just very quickly on that, two things just for people that are separate. I went and saw with my family the Michael Jackson movie last week, and absolutely enjoyed it immensely. The critics are giving it a hard time because of the reality, whatever. The film covers his life up to the age of 30. It's all about the music and the awkwardness of living with his father, Joe Jackson. But it's really about the creative process that Michael was able to do and be and live independently within being isolated, I suppose, from the world, but being such a musical talent, and the pitfalls of, effectively being, ultra super famous and if not the best, one of the greatest musical entertainers of all time. And ironically, I then picked up the memoir of Anthony Hopkins and read that in literally in 12 hours at home, a 350-page book. I could not put it down. And the interesting thing was that Hopkins, like Australia's billionaire Dick Smith, was the dunce of the classroom. Like Dick Smith literally says he was the dumbest guy at school, and yet he becomes this beautiful, brilliant entrepreneur, just like Anthony Hopkins became one of the great actors of all time. And if I can describe just one short thing from it, because he talks about Silence of the Lambs and how he got into character, etc., and he talks about the stillness, etc., that film actors over theatre actors. But he was describing this is what I thought about greatness and how even greatness doubts itself. He described Laurence Olivier, who became his. He was the leader of one of the plays he was in. He came to him when he had a quandary, and Olivier gave him some advice that was contrary to what Hopkins was going to do. And then Olivier himself was going to retire, and it was his last play. And he didn't like the script, wasn't very happy, was quite depressed about it, couldn't quite work out how he was going to make this thing work, and actually thought that his legacy would be that he failed, and it would be a horrible ending. But the one thing he asked for was, he said to the stage director, what I'd like to do is at the back of the stage there where there's a door, I want to open it and walk through it. Director goes, okay, if you want to. And as it turned out, he had a friend come and visit him on the night of the premiere and said, good luck. And Olivier was still negative, and he said, oh, no, I think this is going to be the end of me. And this is Hopkins telling the story. And then he says, and then Olivier walks out onto the stage for the start of the play and opens with his back to the audience at the back of the stage, right near this said door. And he puts a key into the lock, and he turns it to lock the door. And he turns around to the audience and begins his opening monologue. And Hopkins says the genius in that moment, he had locked the entire audience into his room and he owned them for 2 hours. And he says that is what acting is all about, the ability to cross that line, to turn fantasy into a reality in there. And that is the greatness of an actor. And Olivier, almost by osmosis, got into that position by automatic. He still hadn't consciously worked out that he was going to do it, but he did it in that split second. So for the months leading up to it and all the work that he did, he couldn't pick it. And that is the point. So the idea is the movie, the Michael Jackson movie's fabulous for entertainment purposes. It's a motivator in many ways. It's uplifting, it's emotional, it's sad, it's happy, whatever. The Anthony Hopkins book was the same thing. Could not put this down. His recollections of things that happened 85 years ago blew my mind. He remembered them like yesterday. And the same thing goes for this Disclosure Day. Heralding what may well be coming in the future is a big, big deal. We don't know what we don't know. But the one thing is that things are finally turning, and trying to turn the Queen Mary around. This is the last thing I want to say before we go, before I give you your final remarks, Josh. When you're trying to turn politics, you're trying to turn the Queen Mary ship around, and you're literally doing it with the power of the mind, because political will makes you change things and change direction. But one person on their own isn't going to be able to move that Queen Mary to do a 180 degree. but millions of us can. And it happens by getting power to do things such as governments to change their minds. And like the Iran crisis forced the government to reduce its excise here by 26 cents a litre, like it's been able to get the stalwart hardliners in Iran to realise that they're in trouble. This is the power of the mind, and we don't know what our psychic abilities are yet. That's why I like to include all of this stuff, because I think at the end of the day it provides everyone with real hope and a real positive viewpoint, that don't be afraid of what's coming. There are certain things you're going to like, certain things that you aren't, but there's a whole lot more in the direction, and things that we thought about central bank digital currency and total control of the government. As Jared Rennick says, he says it's all about the government serving us, not controlling us. And that's a very simple adjustment in your mind. That's all you need to do. So you say, when you go and vote next, or when you go and join a political party, I want the government to serve me, not control me. That's the way you turn the ship around. And they're my thoughts for today.
Excellent. Well, as far as the alien stuff, I've never really gotten involved too much into all that. I always figured if they were out there, we would have already seen them. But maybe that's a naive way of looking at things. I guess we're going to find out soon enough whether or not they are actually real and true and exist. A lot of people say that they do. So I'm looking forward to that as well. As far as the last thing I'll say is, as far as what's happening right now with Iran, not only are they losing $1 billion a day, but it's kind of like what's happening with their oil and the refineries and everything that's going on. It's kind of like having a 1970s muscle car, okay? And it's in great shape. You've got brand new tires on it. You know, you've redone the engine, the interior. It's just perfect. Everything's just running great, right? But it's sitting because you're too busy, because you're doing different things, whatever, and you haven't started it. So whether it's a new car or an old car, what happens? It gets gummed up, right? The carburetors get clogged. All these different things happen. The fuel jets start, getting clogged up and everything else. That is exactly what is happening to Karg Island and what is happening to Iran's infrastructure in regards to oil and oil refineries. They are gumming up, and they're gumming up to the point where you're not going to be able to blow out those jets. You're not going to be able to change out that carburetor. In other words, the engine's going to seize, and when the engine seizes, you got to start all over. And that's what's happening with Iran.
And if you had your own choice of your own muscle car from that era, what would
take
you
it out every Sunday? Probably an old Camaro or something like that. I think so, probably.
I fell in love with Vin Diesel's purple 66 GTO in the movie Triple X, and maybe I'd swap it for a 68 of the early Pontiac Firebirds.
The old Corvettes are really badass too. A lot of the old Corvettes.
And we can certainly dream about those as that price exponentially grows in that particular era. Well, that's it for us. Thanks everyone for watching. See you all next time.